ahead. Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos. Good morning. Welcome. We're going to begin our panel here in just a moment, but I want to introduce myself. My name is John Fagan. Some of you know me. Some of you might have just met me. I'm blessed to serve under appointment here as a pastor of La Trinidad United Methodist Church. I'm also a member of our local Latino and Hispanic Pastors Association, which we have recently named the United Methodist Hispanic Ministry Association. So that's the official name that we're going to try to run with and invite others to be part of. But this is the second of 3 programs related to La Obra Hispana. We know what that obra means, right? Many of us come from Latino congregations and churches. Others are in Hispanic ministries happening in other churches. And last Saturday, we were blessed to hear a presentation by Bishop Joel Martinez. If you weren't privileged to be part of that historic presentation, there is a video recording of that online on YouTube at the La Trinidad United Methodist Church webpage. If you search for our webpage, look under our channel, that event is posted there, as will the event today. Up at the top, up at the balcony up there is a little camera that's recording and streaming everything that we're doing here today, so be on your best behavior. Que se porten bien porque está la cámara de seguridad, no? But again, I'm very thankful for your presence here today. And thank you, and thanks to Gloria for coming early. Gloria Nava's up here early getting our refreshments ready in the gym, and others worked. After today, we're going to have some sandwiches and other things in the gym as well if you'd like to hang around and have a bite to eat. As far as what we're doing today is a panel discussion. We've got a series of topics. We have experts on this panel that have a richness of experience in this particular field of ministry. And so we're going to be dealing with those topics. We'll have a break in the middle. And we'll also have the opportunity to ask questions from the congregation. What I will ask, though, is if you're going later when we do the conversation, if you will keep your questions or your comments to be brief and concise to let everybody have a chance. And if you'll come forward and I'll give you this microphone to speak. Because without speaking into one of the live mics, it's not going to go out on the internet. It's not going to get recorded. So we need to, that's how we're handling, de esa manera estamos tratando los asuntos de video, que todos hablen con micrófono. So that's just a little bit for later. I am going to ask my spouse, who's here, Raquel, our associate pastor here, if she would open us in a word of prayer as we, come on up, please. And if we could rise, those who are able, we'll begin our session together.
Let us pray. Our loving and gracious God, we thank you for all those who are present here today. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation together and to learn more about the ministry of the Hispanic Ministry in this conference. Gracias, Señor, por tu presencia. Te pedimos que estés con nosotros y que bendigas nuestro tiempo juntos. En nombre de nuestro Señor Jesucristo. Amén.
And as you find your seats, I'd ask our panelists to come forward and take their places here. There's 4 chairs. There's no particular seating order. Sorry I didn't make name tags, but I should have done that. And our first thing we're going to do is have introductions of our panelists. So
I'm the shortest, so I'm going to sit.
the mics are set so that they should pick up your voice pretty good. If you don't hear yourself real well in the room, you can just sort of direct it a little bit more toward the mic. I just want to first mention that I'm very, very thankful and grateful. I'm very grateful that these folks have come together. We have a wide range of experience here today and that impact different areas of our life together as a connectional church. I'll start on the right. We have Reverend Laura Merrill, who is the assistant to the Episcopal Office. Is that the title?
So, yeah, it's still in flux.
AEO?
Bishop doesn't really like the word Episcopal, so now I'm kind of the assistant to the bishop.
Assistant to the bishop. So
Other duties
English
as
rather
assigned.
than Greek, and
Right.
so that works. And Laura's here also, and works in the area of our relationship to the Board of Ordained Ministry and Clergy Excellence as well. And if I could just say a little bit more, I've worked. Laura and I worked together some years ago when Laura and I first entered the conference relationship on the Southwest Texas Conference Commission on Hispanic Ministry. So I'll let Laura say more about herself and her experience in just a moment. Next to her is Dr. Phil Wingler Rio, who is a professor at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Am I right?
Yes.
And then next to him is Dionisio Salazar, a lay member in Austin. What's the name of your church where you're a member?
Both at Emmanuel UMC and also Parker Lane.
Parker Lane and Emmanuel United Methodist Churches in Austin. Dionisio worked for many years as a consultant with the Board of Global Ministries and the National Plan for Hispanic Ministries. And to his left is Isidro Pina, who is almost Reverend Dr. Isidro Pina, right? You close or you did?
Casi.
Yeah, vas para allá. And he is the pastor, appointed pastor at the largest legacy Rio Grande Conference church in our conference, which is at Buen Pastor in Edinburgh, Texas. And he has come up all the way from the valley to be with us today. And Phil's come down from Austin.
Yay.
So let's welcome our panel this morning. Thank you so much. What I want to do first to get our conversation going is, and we're going to go in reverse order since I introduced you in this order, starting with Isidro. Tell us something about yourself and how your ministry intersects with La Obra. So a little bit about yourself and why this matters to you, and a little bit about your experience.
Una vez más, mi nombre es Isidro Piña. Actually, I was born in Mexico many years ago, and I came to the U.S., San Antonio to be exact, back in 1980, en 1980. Y en el 88 fuimos a dar a la iglesia metodista el Buen Samaritano aquí en San Antonio. Fue donde tuvimos el encuentro con nuestro Salvador y encontramos una familia en Cristo. Sobre todo porque nos podíamos identificar con esa congregación porque era completamente hispana y el idioma era español. Ahí estuvimos 2 años solamente, y al tercer año empecé mi primer nombramiento bajo superintendente doctor Roberto Gómez en Uvalde, part-time. Mi primer nombramiento full-time, de ahí salió al siguiente año, y de ahí hasta hoy este es mi año 27 sirviendo como pastor en la iglesia metodista, y la mayoría pues era conferencia Rio Grande hasta que sucedió la unificación. Para mí la obra es muy importante, puesto que viéndolo el crecimiento del pueblo hispano, es muy importante mantener lo que llamamos la obra, alcanzando esas generaciones, esas familias, esas personas nuevas, y aún generaciones que ya tienen tiempo aquí en Estados Unidos. Es con lo que trabajo primordialmente con el pueblo hispano, y ahorita nos estamos extendiendo hacia las colonias ahí en Edinburgh, que es gente que es primera generación aquí en Estados Unidos y necesitan encontrar un lugar como el que mi familia y yo encontramos cuando salimos a buscar una iglesia donde congregarnos.
Interpreting a little bit of that for those, if you could sort of summarize what you said in English, because we have a few people here maybe that only
Yes,
speak English.
okay.
I think everyone here, most folks know Spanish and English both, but
Okay.
just to summarize that.
Once again, I was born in Mexico, and I came to the U.S. back in 1980 to San Antonio. And in 1988, my family and I went to a small church, El Buen Samaritano, here in San Antonio. We spent a couple of years, and then I was given my first appointment, brand new. I was 25 years old when Dr. Roberto Gomez gave me my first appointment part-time in Uvalde, and I've been a pastor ever since for 27 years. When it was the Rio Grande Conference, and now with Rio Texas Conference. And I'm in Edinburgh, El Buen Pastor, and it's 100%, well, 99.9% Hispanics. But we're reaching out to the community, the colonias in Edinburgh, and we're talking about very poor community, and mainly first generation of people from Mexico. So this is what I'm trying to do, is to offer a place for them where they can come and worship. Just like there was a place for us when my wife and I, my family and I went out looking for a church. So that's what we're trying to do. So La Obra is vital. It's important for us to bring those who are seeking, those who are looking for a place where they can feel at home.
Dionisio?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Dionisio Salazar, and I've been doing Hispanic ministries in a professional sense probably for about 20 years. I started this work as I got trained as a lay missioner under the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministries, and I had the honor and privilege of working with many of our leaders, Conrado Soltero, Jose Pablo, Saul Trinidad. I've been working with them for many years, and so that kind of began my work as a layperson doing Hispanic ministries. There was a training program at Perkins. I went up there and came back, did work in Austin. So I've continued to do work in different capacities. In the course of that time, I also got connected with Global Ministries and served as a consultant, and then eventually was hired as a staff person after Conrado had left, and Edgar Vitia had also served in that role. So my role was as executive secretary for Hispanic Latino Ministries. So my portfolio, my area was pretty much the whole country, and so I had the honor of and privilege of traveling to different conferences and working with them in developing and strengthening their Latino ministries. I've had a chance to see things that are happening outside Rio Grande. I'm from Rio Grande originally. My grandfather was one of the original pastors that formed the Texas Methodist Mission Conference, and so so I've been connected as a Methodist all my life. But more recently, because of the plan, I think, and really kind of motivated me to get more involved. So anyway, while it's in Global Ministries, we did this work. Came back about 4 years ago. Been doing more work locally here with the conference. Also worked in the district in Austin as a coordinator, and so during the course of all this unification process that took place, where Rio Grande was united with Southwest Texas, I was also, as a staff person in Global Ministries, was assisting in that process, because the Rio Grande would get funding from the Global Ministries, and so we were involved in that from the beginning. And then later on, I served on the transitioning uniting table. So that was the early kind of structure. Now it's called the Uniting Table, and I sit on that as the chair of one of the 4 vision teams. Under the new structure, we have 4 different areas that were created to support this unification. One was uniting peoples, bringing people from both conferences together. The other was around leadership development, congregational development, and my area is transforming communities. And so we have initiated a program of working with Abel Vega to work directly with churches, many that are working in the Latino community, and training people to go into their communities, to understand their communities, and to get connected. And so we've trained 4 churches this year, one in Austin, one in San Antonio, one in Eagle Pass, and one in Brackettville. And so it's a year-long training program. So this is our effort, this is our contribution to the unification, is to really develop some new leaders and different ways of doing ministries. So I think so far we've had some success with that, and I can get more into details on that, but that's been my role in terms of Hispanic ministries.
Next.
Well, I feel like I'm on a panel here with some all-stars.
I know.
Some heavy hitters. So it's an honor to be here and just be part of the conversation. Just to share a little bit about my background, my experience. I actually was introduced to Hispanic ministries and Latino issues in general. When I was in the 8th grade, this was 1980, and what was happening in Latin America in 1980? El Salvador, that's when Bishop Romero was killed. In Nicaragua, they had the revolution in 1979. So my home church in Evanston, Illinois was concerned, interested in everything that was happening. And a bishop from Costa Rica came to Chicago to work on his PhD. And our church invited him to be our interim pastor for a year. And that was Bishop Jacinto Ordóñez. Where's Saúl Trinidad? Yeah. He knows Jacinto Ordóñez. And so they came to our congregation, and they have 3 children. The children are all about my age, and they didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Spanish. So my parents decided to welcome the pastor and his family, and so we invited them over for dinner. And so the family came over, and I was in my room, and my mom came and knocked on the door and said, "Why don't you come down and meet them?" I'm like, "But they don't speak any English, you know." What am I gonna say? And so I went downstairs and opened I had a closet with all these games in it, and so we found games to play. And it turns out that this three kids, they stayed for 5 years in our youth group. We became really good friends. The oldest, Sara, I went to her wedding when they went back to Costa Rica. Later, after that, our church became a sanctuary church, the sanctuary movement in the 1980s, and we hosted several refugees. Two, when I was a senior in high school, they were from El Salvador, and they came and they shared their testimony of why they had to leave their country and how they were persecuted. They're part of the student movement. And through an interpreter, I asked at the end, how old are you? And they were just about my age, like 18 years old. And so I thought, wow, this could be me, right? They're about my age, and they've already had to flee their country and come to a new country. And so that just touched me, and I felt God calling me to a life of missionary service. So in college, I did a study abroad program in Mexico, Cuautla, Morelos, which right now the state of Morelos, as you know, is heavily hit by the earthquake, and so we're praying for all of them. And then after college, I applied for the mission intern program, and Laura was a MIP also, there you go. And so I was assigned to Nicaragua for a year and a half, and then came back to the Rio Grande Valley for a year and a half in Harlingen. And Pastor Greg Hackett was my pastor there at Wesley United Methodist Church in Harlingen. And then the mission board, GBGM, had just renewed relations with the Methodist Church in Cuba. And so I was invited to go and be the first missionary to go back to Cuba since the missionaries had left in 1961. So 30 years had lapsed. And so at that point, I got married, and my wife, Diana, and I went to Cuba as missionaries in the 1990s. And she felt the call to ministry, so she went to the seminary there in Matanzas and graduated and was ordained as a deacon there. And then after that, we continued to serve in Mexico, and I taught at the Baez Camargo Seminary in Mexico City. So I did a total of 15 years with the board of missionary service. Following that, I was in North Carolina, and my wife planted a Hispanic Ministry, Spanish-speaking church, or actually 2 churches there. And then came to Perkins. I was the director of the Hispanic Latino Ministries program there, where I met several of you. And then currently I'm at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, where we have a certificate in ministry program in Spanish online, a training program, and we also have La Mujer Virtuosa program, Bible studies for leadership training for women. So that's a little bit about my background, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Laura Merrill, and yeah, I try to give you the short version, I guess. How did we become interested in this? It's an interesting question, really, right? And so there are lots of threads along the way. But it turns out that I found out when I was in high school that my father, who I was a pastor in Southwest Texas Conference, named Chuck Merrill, that actually when he was born, his name was Jose Carlos Arriaga. It's like, oh, really? So it turns out that, my grandpa Merrill was not my biological grandpa, that my grandmother had been married in Tucson, and that my father came from two pretty distinguished Mexican families who had, crossed the Douglas Mountains with the Revolution. In fact, my grandmother, her great uncle was Plutarco Elias Calles, who founded the PRI in Mexico. So, so I found out at about age 17 or 18 that's really who my family was. So, made some trips to Tucson. My grandfather was deceased by that time, but all of his uncles who looked his brothers who looked just like him with the sticky out ears and the big hair, kinky hair and the big forehead like this, they all looked exactly alike. And so it was like finding out that my dad was a puzzle piece to a puzzle that I didn't know existed. I didn't know he was a lost puzzle piece until I saw the rest of the puzzle. It's like, oh my gosh. And all kinds of things made sense about him after that. The cathedral there in Tucson where he was baptized in this font that was this big, just all of this stuff. And I think then I went to college, and so I did go to college in 1981, and Teología de la Liberación was the thing, right? Everybody was becoming investment bankers and accountants, except this little group of us at Southwestern in Georgetown who were studying all kinds of, other stuff and hoping to, help us keep the world from being blown up by nuclear arms. That was the thing, of course, in the 80s. So studied that, kind of got I did a lot of study in Spanish and had learned some, but really kind of got a good foundation of that. Ended up, a couple of years later, Ana Soltero recruited me to become a mission intern, and I was so thrilled to get to be part of that program. My 3-year program was in Chile, in Concepcion, and then in Tucson, Arizona, of all places. That didn't put in for that or anything. That just happened, right? So ended up in Tucson. That was working with Central American refugees at the time. Also, I was the conference border ministry coordinator. So led a lot of groups into Mexico, helped people build houses out of pallets, stuff that liability plan would never have let me do had I, but the squatters communities in Nogales, Sonora were, that we did a lot of work there and a lot of wonderful relationships. I'd say between my time in Chile and in Tucson, I developed, first of all, a part of my heart that got humbled and blessed by poor people and by the generosity of poor people and the faith and the just joy in the midst of suffering, of course. It's not all joy, but that became sort of a North Star for me in a way. Then I went to seminary, became a preacher, and, did all the preacher stuff. And so tried to wonder, and in the midst of my young adult time in Tucson, also became part of the committee to develop a national plan for Hispanic Ministries or something like that. And that's where I met all these people. Jose Palos, I was his secretary on our subcommittee, taking notes for Jose Palos. He's the taskmaster, so. So anyway, wondering as a pastor, why am I serving this Anglo church that, I'm trying, but it's hard to know where to put all of this that I've did. You know, the church has invested in me. I think God has invested in me. I've invested in this life, and I don't know what the end of that is going to be. And so in a local church that might be interested in that as some sort of side thing, but not really. Like, you have a job over here, preacher, so do this job, right? And then in 2010, I got a call from the bishop to go be the district superintendent on the border, which of course I thought was ridiculous, but the chance to work on the border, and especially knowing that unification was coming, was one of the greatest blessings of my life. And so to go to the Valley region, the Rio Grande Valley, and really South Texas at the time, McAllen District went all the way up to Laredo and Alice and Freer, Hebronville. It felt to me then what I still believe to be true today of the Rio Texas Conference, which is this was a grand experiment to know whether we as Christian United Methodists are going to be able to climb over every natural inclination we have, which is to be homogeneous and to stick with our own, and that is not just language, and it's not just ethnicity, it's age, it's education, it's income. All of those things are barriers, and they make us stay apart from each other. And the question is, can we in Christ climb over that stuff or not? I mean, I believe that's what it's intended to do. When we had Bishop Martinez, who led us through a plan for Hispanic Ministry here in this conference, that was the deal. Like, we're not throwing a bone to some people. This is about our gospel task of being in community with people who are different, whatever that means. So anyway, not to go to preaching, but I'm given inspiration by that thought and by that work, and I think the call is ever before us. I think this conference has the opportunity to lead the rest of the church. We keep saying that, but it's true, and so I hope to be a part of that, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation with so many esteemed colleagues, lay and clergy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, our first topic of conversation is going to be a segue from last week's presentation till today, in which we're going to talk about the changing mission field. The term mission field appears in the unification documents. It's often in our lexicon of terms that we use in the new conference. Around 1874, and that's a long time ago, right? From about 1874 until the unification, the United Methodist Church had dedicated connectional structures at a district or conference level devoted entirely to reaching Spanish-speaking population. So they've been through various different names: the Border Mission District, the Border Mission Conference, the Texas-Mexican Conference, etc. And Bishop Martinez gave us some history about that. In early documents of that, when that was set up, the missionary who was the superintendent of that, Alejandro Sutherland, whose window is over here, he was the one who organized this church. He was writing to the rest of the church at his time, the Methodist Episcopal Church South, to give a justification for how they were doing things and why they were doing them the way they were. And essentially what he said was that the work in the United States, in Texas, with at that time, the Mexican population, should be considered more of like foreign missions model and paradigm than domestic missions. The MEC South had two divisions of its mission. We had this in the GBGM for years, the National Division and then the International Church. And the reason that he gave for that, he gave us a number of reasons for this. He said there were basically three reasons why to treat this population more like doing mission in a foreign country, like we have Edgar Avitia as in charge of Central America, et cetera, than doing it domestically. The first was that this was a population that at the time was considered nominally Christian. He did not respect the Catholic identity of these folks and thought that they were nominal believers, that they really weren't truly evangelized through and through. Secondly, he gave the warrant that Spanish was so important. So administratively, since Spanish was the universal language of that community, it was needed to have a Spanish-speaking organization. And then the last reason he gave was the disproportional poverty of the community. So there was tremendous social inequity between that community and the new white settlers and other people that were moving into this area. And because of that disparity, again, he used that to justify having missional funds and other things. That model that he set up with those warrants persisted from 1874 until, in some way or another, till unification. So the question is about the mission field for the panel. What aspects of Sutherland's mission field are different today regarding the Hispanic population, the Latin American population, and what are the same? I would expect there would be a little bit of both. What are different, new, unique, and what's changed? That's the first of two questions. So I'm going to put that out for the panel. Anybody would like to speak about the context of ministry? What's different from the world that Sutherland described in 1874 when he was making his case for denominational resources to subsidize that conference that he was and district that he was leading? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
All right.
I think, I think the whole idea of mission has evolved throughout the years. The early understanding of mission was the church going out into the world and offering something for the world, that we were the sort of the benefactor, the patrons, and people were the recipients of mission. In working with Global Ministries, I had a chance to really understand a different idea of mission, that mission actually works both ways, that it's not the church taking something out to the world, but it's also the world bringing something to the church. And so once you see that brings about a different understanding of how we are to engage in the world. The early missionaries that were here in this part of the world, in the Southwest, brought with them ideas that they had been trained in. And the result of that, we can see the result of that from the Rio Grande, the old Rio Grande Conference, the leadership. Much of the leadership at the national level has been provided by Rio Grande. So we have a long history, longer in Texas than anywhere else in terms of doing Hispanic ministries if you compare other places. So there's been a lot of fruits to that. But I think that some of those ideas still are with us. That mission is kind of this exotic thing that we go to another country, we take it there, when really mission is in our own backyard. And so in Global Ministries, there's a new concept that's called a mission together. It's a partnership that we partner with the people that we're working with, we build relationships. So that really changes it, that we don't have all the solutions, that God is in the world, God is already working. So how do we partner with what God is already doing? So I think that has changed. Just in terms of the demographics of this part of the country also, during the 1900s, there was much poverty regarding the Mexican population. Today you have a middle class. You still have poverty, but it's a different dynamic. We have now people that have, seminary trained, college educated. So so I think it's part of the struggle right now, I think, is that the Methodist Church still engages in those old models of ministry. And so, we're in this place where we're wanting to try something new, and that's what this conference is about. But I think we need to be aware that, those old ideas still exist. And I think to a certain extent that's limiting our impact. And we're just starting this project, but it does require a whole new definition of mission of theology.
Thank you. Thank you. Any others, please? Phil.
Thank you for that. Building on what Dionisio said, I think just the word mission, how it was used in that context with Alejandro Sutherland, has a way of othering people, making them someone different than ourselves. And it's interesting if you were to contrast the word evangelism with mission. We would evangelize people in our own communities, but we would do mission to somebody outside of our community. And so just that term mission means, okay, these people are different from ourselves. And, we've kind of seen that concept in the church also. And I don't know the exact statistic, but I think the number of Hispanics in the United Methodist Church is about 1% of the membership, right? And it's about 17% of the nationwide, according to the last census, 17.5%. So our church is way behind as far as keeping up with the demographic trends in the United States. And then building on the point about how Catholics are nominal Christians, I think in general our society has moved to a kind of a post-Christendom society. I think that we can't assume that our neighbor that lives right across the street from us or beside us is a Christian, or he or she is going to a church. I think we have to assume just the opposite. That person is probably not a Christian. And so I think there's a general need to do evangelism everywhere, you know, not just with somebody that's a nominal Catholic, but everywhere. And then Hal Racinos, who was my colleague at Perkins, he talks about instead of bringing people into the church, getting the church to go into the barrio, evangelizing the church, evangelizing people who are in the pews, that you can't just assume just because somebody is a member of a church or attends a church that they are Christian, that they are fully evangelized, right? So we have to get people in the pews out into the neighborhood, out into the community, to live out the fullness of the gospel, to live out discipleship. And then I'll follow up where Dionisio talked about mission and the concept of missio Dei, that God is a missionary God. So God is the one that's doing the sending. So even the church, instead of bringing people into the church, sending the church is God's instrument to point to be a sign of the coming of the kingdom of God. So how can we get the church, instead of being a stationary institution trying to bring people into it, to get the church to be sent into a hurting, needing world? So I'll stop there.
No, that's fantastic. Anyone else? Stacey, there, please.
I think the needs are the same. The way we're doing church is different. I don't think we're reaching out to the people in need. I'm talking about my own. In my case, like I said in the beginning, yes, we're trying to reach out to the colonias, but it's been hard because our congregation at one point they were at the same level talking about economics, but you know they went to school and they became professionals. And now they're forgetting about those who are behind. And como yo lo veo es que no estamos haciendo el trabajo, aunque las necesidades vemos que siguen siendo las mismas de ese tiempo, porque no nos podemos identificar con el pueblo, sus necesidades. Hemos cambiado demasiado a lo que es la realidad de las cosas, porque muchos de nosotros nos hemos educado, así es que el nivel ya no está al mismo nivel, pues. Así es que hay esa desconexión. Entonces, como decía mi profesor, decía, hay que educar a la congregación, hay que evangelizar. We need to evangelize the congregation, to take the congregation out so they can learn, para que aprendan lo que está en la comunidad y de esa manera poder crecer como ellos, ser como ellos y poder traerlos también. Es muy importante alcanzar ese pueblo. Entonces yo pienso, this is why I see it, the needs are the same. The way we do church nowadays is totally different. Ahora es más tipo, diría, negocio, kind of a business type of church instead of evangelizing. Y ese es mi sentir cuando miro yo, when I go out into the colonias, that's what I sense, that's what I feel. We're forgetting about the real needs of the people.
Just very briefly, it just strikes me that one thing that is probably the same, although you're a better historian than I, John, but this otherness, I think it's our schizophrenia, especially in Texas, about who are we. I mean, we've seen this with this whole conversation about the Confederacy in our nation and the way history was taught. And, you know, I barely heard in Texas history that Texas was part of the Confederacy. I mean, you didn't hear that, right? And yet we were. And so, and so to hear, you know, that Rio Grande work was begun as a mission to the other when, how is the other? I mean, what, you know, how is that possible here? And yet we have this schizophrenia that we don't even remember who we were, and we don't know who we are. And so that there are people who have lived here all their lives and still are able to think of Hispanic people, no matter how long they've been here, as other, is just beyond me. And yet it is true, and it's a very active part of our identity, this weird forgetting or never having known or just willfulness about otherizing, you know, that a whole population. And I think that's the same. It's complex. It's you know, it's not always clear. It's not black and white like that. But it is a thing. It is part, and it swirls around, and it has always done so, and it continues to do so today.
Thank you very much. Very perceptive, and y'all jumped over to the next, what I was going to ask next, which is what's changed about our philosophy of mission. The demographics are different than they were back then, but there are those same factors. The inequity issue, for example. I think Pew Research has reported that on average Latinos have, Anglos have 20 times more net worth than other ethnic groups in the United States of African American or Latino heritage. Here in San Antonio, it's marked as one of the most unequal economic zones in America. The zip code where we're sitting right now is the poorest zip code in San Antonio, where the average household income is something like $23,000 as compared to $160,000 average household income where the conference office is located. So there's a lot of that still. And that impacts, that's going to impact how we approach funding and structure and things that are later in this conversation. But thank you again for your responses to that. We're going to move on to our next topic, which is about structure. Those structures that we had before, as y'all have noted, were designed around a philosophy of mission. They were designed in a particular way of delivering the gospel to form disciples, to form leaders, to fund ministry. And now we have a new structure that was put together in the unification. Would it be fair to say this at the beginning, just to clarify this, that this structure is not set in stone? Would that be right? Laura, you could probably speak to that. It's not. I believe our bishop is examining it as well, right?
Yeah, we are looking at it, and I think it was even said at the beginning, this, you know, if we look exactly the same 5 years from now as we do today, we will not have really done, you know, I mean, we didn't expect that, and yet, so yes, we are looking at it. I think even, you know, after Bishop Schneese's arrival, it wasn't even so much him looking at it as the vision teams themselves looking at themselves. A whole, you know, those 4 teams that Dionisio named, I mean, they have functioned and not functioned to, you know, a pretty wide degree. I think there's a range there, and some are like, we don't even know why we exist, and so they never meet. And then another one, this one here with these two, is like the Energizer Bunny vision team, and they're just all over the place changing the world. So transforming communities vision team, they're getting the job done. So anyway, yes, I think that's safe to say that even internally, members of the Uniting Table have felt frustration about a lack of clarity. I think yeah, that's fair to say.
Okay, well, thank you. So structurally speaking, prior to unification, we had the Rio Grande Annual Conference, and then in the Southwest Texas Conference, we had a few places that anyone interested in initiating or funding or getting help with Hispanic Ministry knew where to go. If somebody was at in a nascent Hispanic ministry today, for example, Isidro is interested in getting a presence in the colonias. Starting with the annual conference, and then we'll work our way down to the district and the local church, because all of those are structures. Where in the annual conference is the phone call going to be made? Who is on the staff? Who is the person? Is there a person that's going to take that phone call and start that conversation? Is there somebody designated for that, or is it in a committee or whatever?
Okay, let me give that a shot also.
Yes, please. Here,
So under the new structure, these 4 vision teams were going to carry out the vision of the unification, which is around mission, and that was the understanding. We're a brand new project, a new perspective, a new approach to mission. So these teams were tasked to figure out how this was going to happen. The way that the Hispanic Ministry focus was developed was that each of the teams would have 2 representatives that would be there to advocate for Hispanic ministries. That was the original. That there was the decision made by the Judicial Council, or they reviewed the plan, and they decided, well, they had some questions about that, so those representatives, that Hispanic ministry focus in each of those teams was changed. There were 2 people on my vision team, and that they're no longer there representing that. The only vision team that is now kind of working with that is is the Congregational Development team, and that team is not really working. So I think we've got some bumps in the road here as far as how this plan has been developed, or not has been implemented. You know, there was a lot of excitement with Rio Grande. This was going to be a new project, you know, and that there was a decision to go for unification. I think that there does need to be more focus on activating those teams. I mean, that's the plan, that's the structure. This is what we agreed upon, and I understand the difficulties with that. What I think is, I think our team was somewhat more successful because we had a process. We had a process that was very bottom up, a lot of participation, a lot of ideas, and so what we came up with, it was the ownership of the team. And I think in the church, what we struggle oftentimes is sort of a top-down kind of leadership approach. And so people get left out and say, well, if I'm not part of the decision making, why do I participate? So because of my work, my training as a facilitator, we've done some of this action planning, and so we came up with this project. It's called Transformational Communities of Praxis. And that's really about, it's kind of a technical term, but it's really about a new thing, you know, developing these communities of shalom, approaching the community from a different perspective, that there's no distinction between us and them. That's another problem, I think. There's many things that in our system that are kind of barriers to doing the work that we're interested in. And, you know, we see them as the other, when really there's no distinction. I mean, they're not in the church, but, you know, and I think some of those people may be more Christians than we are, you know. But we've got to change our perspective of how we approach this. So anyway, getting back to the structure. So I was reading the unification report. I don't know if y'all have seen this, but I really encourage you to take a look at this, because this is what brought it all together. There was a team that came down from the General Commission on Finance and Administration. They did these interviews with many people in both conferences. They formed this unification steering committee, and they wrote this idea, this vision. This is how we're going to work together. And it's only been 2 years into this project. But I was looking at the other day, and this is what it said. I just want to read this because I thought this is very critical. It says, who is God calling us to be? It says, we are called to the love of God and neighbor, to point ourselves beyond our own communities of faith to those outside, knowing that the church exists not for itself, but for the mission of Christ to the world. It says, we are the people of God committed to equip lay and clergy leaders to serve and to build relationships across cultural, ethnic, generational, and socioeconomic boundaries. The last one, we are the people of God committed to fairness, equity, justice, inclusiveness in all aspects of our ministry. Our mission field is a primary focus of our attention and resources rather than the needs of congregations, facilities, and clergy. That's what it says. And so where are we now? Where are we now? That's a question that we all need to consider. Is this still our focus? And so you know, in the course of this work that I was doing with the teams, we used the parable that Jesus told about the wine, the new wine and the new wineskins. And he talked about how people prefer, how difficult it is to have new wineskins. So what I think what we're happening in part is that we're going back to the old wineskins. And so we really need to be conscious of that. If we're doing a new thing, what are those new ways of being church, those new wineskins that we need to create and also to be aware of? So that's a tension. I mean, that's a dynamic that's happening. And so, you know, again, we're 2 years into this project, but this is our founding document, and this is what I think needs to guide, you know, the work as we move forward. So, Laura, I don't know if you have any comments on that,
Please.
or anyone else, but you know, that's.
Thank you for referencing that. It's a very values-laden, ethos-rich
No question.
statement.
Right.
And please, more comments on that. How is our structure responding to that imperative? Or what can we?
I can answer your first question.
Okay, please.
But no, I mean, but if somebody wants to bounce off of Dionisio, I mean, seriously, somebody else want to, do you have something to say?
Yeah,
Go for it. No,
Please.
because I'm going to jump.
To the
Yeah,
question.
no, go ahead.
Well, the only thing that I was going to add, I'll be real brief, is that I'm the newest to the Rio Texas Conference, and so I mean, you all have a lot more experience and knowledge about this. But I will say, from kind of an insider-outsider perspective, that the Rio Texas Conference has a great opportunity before it because of the unification process and because things aren't set in stone, to use your term. You're at least talking about these issues. You have an opportunity to create structures that are more missional and use all of those resources towards fulfilling God's mission. Whereas other conferences that have been around longer, their structures are more entrenched and they have a long tradition, and it's really hard to change. And so I think the newness of it, what was it, January 1st, 2015, the unification, at least you're talking about it and there are opportunities. But I will say, if you don't hurry and do something, then you will just kind of go back to that muscle memory of doing things the way we've always done them.
I mean, I think I'll say a couple things kind of to answer your initial question, which is like, where would you go? You know.
Who to call? Who do you call?
Yeah, and
Who are you going to call?
and this is even in flux a little bit, but basically the thing, as I understood it as a district superintendent when it happened, was and then maybe a year later, actually, some other funds came onto line. You know, there's one place that unfortunately is getting replenished, which is called in the discipline, it's called urban ministry funds, but that's a very misleading word. What it means is funds that are proceeds from the sale of church property that is closed. So when we've closed a church, sometimes we're able to repurpose that church and do something else. And other times we're not able to for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's not in very good shape, or it's not in the right place, or if you were going to do a new thing with new people, that's not the place you're going to get it done in, you know, for a number of reasons. So sometimes we sell these properties. The discipline basically says that when you sell a church property, if the church was located in a county, this is the discipline, y'all, if it was located in a county of 50,000 people or more population, then the funds, a little bit goes to the conference for the trustees they have to pay lawyers and you know, back bills on the gas company, and they have to pay for all kinds of stuff when these churches close. A lot of times they've got stuff wrong with them, or back bills, or all kinds of things. So once the conference has taken a little bit for that fund, then the rest of those funds get divided 75% to the district. They're tagged for use in that district, and 25% for use with new church development by a conference. And so like the Congregational Vitality Vision Team, for example, would ostensibly have this. So this very uneven, erratic. There are certain districts that haven't sold any churches, and so they don't have any of this money. Other districts have sold a whole bunch. And the other thing the other overlay, this is how complicated it is, the other overlay is that when that's a Rio Grande Conference church that got sold, we made an agreement coming into unification that those funds would be reserved for Hispanic Ministry uses. So you wouldn't use those funds to start a suburban church in North Austin. Those are also tagged for a purpose. So that's one source of funding, all right? What we don't have real clear is, who makes the decisions. Back in Southwest Texas, it used to be that, if a DS said, well, give me my money, then the conference would write them a check, and the DS and the district people, leadership, would do whatever they were going to do with those funds. I think what we decided was that at the same time, this is going to be way too long, I'm sorry. At the same time, we did set up a grant review committee. And so there are grant funds also in the budget and some sort of carryover funds from the past that a grant review team has some jurisdiction over and has accepted applications, right? That application process looked like something out of medieval Spain in its complexity when we started. And so we've tried to simplify that. But every quarter or so, we change something about it. So it's a mess, okay, admittedly. But it's still there. And that grant review team has been populated by people from every district, supposed to be from the district strategy teams. Because the other thing we haven't talked about, in addition to these vision teams, is that the districts are supposed to be driving their own stuff in terms of knowing where their hot spots are, knowing where the need is, knowing they're the ones on the ground who are going to know whether this church is viable to flip and do something different or not. So those folk from the districts are the ones who've been making decisions about these grants. We've got some folks sitting in this room who have gotten some of that grant funding. And what we did was give the team the jurisdiction over the property funds as well, so that they would help districts. They would ask districts for an accounting. If a district's going to ask for $125,000, then, which is the top grant for a new church start or something, then we needed to see a plan. We didn't just want to write a check. So anyway, it just means that there are legacy funds there from property sales. There are grant funds that are in the budget, although my prediction is those aren't going to last forever as we continue to cut this budget. There are congregational development funds in the budget. Then the district strategy teams are part of that pipeline. And then the last thing that I'll say, which is not set, and I maybe shouldn't talk about it, but the fact is that this TCOP, this Transformational Communities of Praxis that Abel and Dionisio and their team have worked on and invented, is the first example, in my knowledge, of a Methodist Healthcare Ministries grant to the conference that has typically always been used for clergy. It's the first time that a chunk of that money has been used for something else. And that whole Methodist Healthcare Ministry grant funding is in the process of getting re-looked at. And in fact, I just talked to Mickey the other day and said, if it were up to me, we would point those funds toward training whoever, not just clergy, to do the work that Dionisio has described. And so how do we build and equip churches who know how to listen, who respect where God is at work already outside of themselves, and who are on fire with what they do know, and also humbled about what they don't know, right? And how do we engage the world in that way? I see that grant helping us in those ways. Now, that wouldn't be about starting new churches, but it would be about training people, training teams, training lay clergy teams.
And that
Sorry,
deals
that
with
was-
no, that's fine, and that saves us time later because the last subject is finances. So that we've covered some of that.
Okay, so who
But-
do you call? I mean, who do you call? Karen Horan,
That's-
Mission
that's-
Vitality Center, Abel Vega, Shelley Cannerdale, you know, call
Y'all
one of
catch
them.
those names, write them down. Those
Call-
are the names.
Just call
Those are the
Abel.
people on
Just call
staff.
Abel. He will direct you.
Those are the folks to call.
You know what? Abel is the
Call the superintendent.
Call your actually.
Absolutely, thank you.
Actually, because your district superintendent's going to have to sign before you get anything, and their folk. There you go. Yeah, so just call Greg, actually. Don't call Abel. Abel's really busy because we had a hurricane. So call Greg, because Greg's not busy.
He's not busy.
He's not busy. He doesn't have
Or
anything
your
to
respective
do.
district superintendent if you're from out of town. In other words, the connectional structure, the hierarchical structure, is sufficiently similar to what we had before that you can still call your district superintendent and have.
You should.
Be able to call and get resourced on Hispanic and Latino ministries. And then there are committees within the conference as well. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that a couple of things. One regarding where to call. So in the old days, the Southwest Conference had what was called the Hispanic Commission. So this was a group that came together that did this work, did funding, et cetera, and I worked with them in terms of some of resourcing them and doing some strategic planning. What's happening right now in the Methodist Church, and by discipline, it recommends that each conference have a conference committee on Hispanic Latino ministries. That's a recommendation. I don't think it's a requirement. What's happening more and more throughout the country is that those committees have gone away. And so that means there's no longer a place where people can come together and say, oh, this is where you go to. Some conferences have also had a coordinator for Hispanic ministries. When I was at GBJAM, I oversaw missionaries that were assigned from the plan. Some of them served as conference coordinators for Hispanic ministries. I would like for the conference to consider that question, to have a staff person funding to specifically be involved in Hispanic ministries because of our demographics, our population. I think that makes a lot of sense. Right now, the structure doesn't have that, and so that could be a way to kind of move forward to bring us, to provide more clarity in some of this. The other thing also is the district. So another thing that's happening right now, because we have these new structures, they're not always communicating with each other. The district strategy teams are critical, and the idea with that was that the DSs would serve as mission strategists. I think I had the chance to serve in the Austin area, and there was some discussion about mission, but again, it's that old tendency again for the old wineskins, because what happened is that what I saw happening is that we're really more focused on maintenance, doing maintaining the structure versus the newness. And so you really have to be intentional if you're going to create new, innovative, transformative ministries. So those strategy teams aren't having that much connection to the vision teams, and that needs to happen. So these are ways that some of the system can get better aligned with itself. But to the extent that people are interested in this area, want to do more, I encourage you to take the initiative. Read those founding documents, have those conversations with the DS, with Abel's office, the district, and there's things happening, but it's just one has to seek it out. It's not like here's all the information about Hispanic ministries, or maybe there could be a place on the website, the conference website that says here are the resources, here's the focus, et cetera. And again, I think people say, well, what about the other groups? I think we need to do this across the board. That we can't. It doesn't work to have sort of a generic approach to ministry. We've got to understand what is our reality, who are the people in our midst, and how do we specifically develop programs that can address those realities.
Thank you. Please.
I have a question. As I'm hearing all of this, is that the disconnect, there's a lot of information that we're receiving here. We ourselves in El Divino Salvador that do not have a conference pastor, we have a Presbyterian pastor, is not in the loop. How do we get the information? There's, like Dionisio was saying, where do you go in the web? I go to the conference web,
that brings up an important point about structure, because when we think about structure, we think generally district and conference, but our local churches are the bedrock of the structure. And not just local churches that are predominantly Latino congregations, but Anglo congregations with vital Hispanic ministries going on as well, and other multicultural congregations. And then on top of that, our extension ministries, our social justice ministries that predominantly serve Latino folks as well, and of course our seminaries. They're part of this overall set of assets that we call structure. And your remarks also deal with another topic we're going to deal with here in a moment, which is our witness and our communications and the relevance of that to the cause and to the needs as far as folks interacting. I want to move to the next topic of inclusiveness. One of the things that happened in unification initially was that we put 50-50 representation on all the committees and other such things. And inclusiveness is something that is enshrined in the Constitution of the United Methodist Church. Article 4 states that the church cannot discriminate on the basis of economic, well, it used to say economic status. I don't know if that language got preserved or not. We had constitutional amendments about the word status. But generally speaking, that the church is an inclusive church that spans all ethnicities, nationalities, and status. And what we generally collect demographics on membership, we used to collect demographics on conference elected offices. So we used to, and the way that was done is that you were either an ethnic person or you were a white person. That's how Southwest Texas used to do that, which is kind of silly if you think about it. Because, I mean, you try to tell some people in Fredericksburg that they're not ethnic because they're white, and they're going to feed you a bratwurst, you know. But so there's a sense in which, though, that we do track this. How important is it for us to have, and I'll ask this to the panelists, for inclusiveness to exist at the levels, and we're going to have some ethnic local churches that are in ethnic, predominantly Latino and African American and other neighborhoods. How important is that inclusiveness at all levels of the conference, our committees, our conference staff, and how well are we doing on that? So that's the question on inclusiveness.
I think it's vital, because let's say you have one committee of just one group of people, let's say all males or females, they're not going to be able to identify with the rest of the community. Same thing when it comes to ethnics. If we want to reach out to the Hispanic community, then we need to have someone who understands and speaks the same, I don't want to say the language, but speaks just like them, to be able to identify themselves with the community, and the community identify themselves with us. So we have to look, we have to reflect, we have to look like those who live around us. So I think it is vital to be inclusive when it comes to forming committees or different groups of everything. Yes.
Anyone else? I mean, we're supposed to be reporting our demographics of our local church membership, and this goes for all the churches in the conference. I'm wondering how much leadership the pastors are getting in order to fulfill that responsibility. And I ask that because I discovered something curious yesterday in a different annual conference, and that's that one of the largest church in Methodism isn't reporting the demographics of its congregation, of its 14,800 members. Hasn't done so for 3 years. And the problem with that, those kind of little errors add up. Yeah. And so when the GCFA says that we're a 94% white denomination in the United States, that might not be accurate.
Right.
That might be off by 8 to 10% because of all the churches that just say, well, I don't want to report, I don't want to count people by that, I don't want to classify people by that. But isn't it true that one of the measurements of our success, we mentioned that 17% of the U.S. population was Latino, 1 to 2% of Methodist membership. Our conference is 57%, I believe, Hispanic population, 15%, is that right? Something about 15%. We're actually twice as inclusive as the general church, okay, just to let you know in our conference. We're twice as inclusive as the U.S. Methodist Church of Latinos. Still got a long way to go. But without those data, how are we going to really know? And how important is it for folks, pastors, et cetera, to report that inclusiveness, to have attention to it?
You know, I mean, I remember as a local church pastor in Los Fresnos in the Valley, sitting down with my membership list, which I could do because it was a small enough church. And it's like, yep, she's Japanese. Yep, I mean, you know, you knew everybody, so I could do it. As a district superintendent, and I did the same in Wimberley. I mean, I did that because I wanted to know, actually. And Los Fresnos Church at the time was like 35% Hispanic, which was kind of a big deal in Southwest Texas Conference at the time. As a DS then, you know, then we moved to not worrying so much about who your members are. We don't really, that's less important because membership comes and goes, and you know, people don't join and they still think they're a member and all that stuff in the church. So you start trying to count worship attendance. Well, I would have loved to put as one of my, you know, primary goals that there's more ethnic diversity in the worship service. Well, we don't have a box for that on the sign-in pad. Cokesbury doesn't sell sign-in pads that says, what race are you? What ethnic group do you belong? I mean, we don't, how do you track that? And yet we know from all kinds of things that you get what you measure. If you measure it and you make people report it, that means it's important. If you don't measure it, that means it must not be important. Well, that's a thing that's real important, and we haven't figured out how to measure it, and we need to figure that out. That's my only.
Yes. Oh, you had a question, please?
I mean, in my setting, it would just be to say that in the Rio Grande Valley, where anywhere from 85 to 98% of your population is Hispanic, and you have, you know, 98% old white people in the church, that just means that that church is not reflecting their community. Now, maybe they're just not going to, but it tells you something about them. You know, it means that either they have reached folks in their neighborhood or they haven't. That's all. I mean, it's just a mirror. It's like going to the doctor and not taking your blood pressure. It's just one, it's not the only thing about them. It's not the only metric that matters. It's just one thing about them. And I want to say, brother, that I respect that completely. And in fact, one of our best ways of growing is going to be to have a whole range of options for people. And there are folk who are going to want that experience and not this, you know, and a more homogeneous kind of place. I think in some of our newer places, and especially with people who are not part of the church, that's where we want to see more diversity in new outreach. If we're going to, you know, starting something new, putting money into something, especially now, if the population in that neighborhood is 98% whatever, well, then that's probably who's going to go to that church. But so it's not about changing people who have done it this way forever, but it is about new stuff and places where kind of younger folks are coming. How diverse is it? That's all. And it's, again, just a mirror. It's just a mirror. It's not like you're in trouble because you didn't get any white people to come to your church. That's not like that. That's not the point of it.
That speaks to the responsibility to report the numbers
Well,
and the
let me just say-
inclusiveness.
Let me just say, I think the whole question of inclusiveness is really kind of the heart of the matter of what's gonna help us to move forward. I remember when we were first starting this process, I had a conversation about the challenges of unification, and there was a person in there, Brian Heyman, some of you may know him. He originally is from South Africa. He went through a period where South Africa was segregated, apartheid, and he said this project is going to take y'all about 20 years to really bring this unification together. So we've come together, but we still have a long ways to go to be unified. And I think that's where representation is so important in all these committees, that we have that voice, because without that voice, Latino perspective, racial ethnic perspective, many decisions are made regarding the closing of churches, the funding, et cetera. And we've really got to get it right. I will say that my understanding of unification in the beginning was that we were going to have 50-50 representation for 3 quadrennium. The very first annual conference that took place, there was a motion on the floor to change that from 3 to 2, and it passed. So even from the beginning, there was this effort. I sit on the uniting table. It is not 50% Latino. I was looking at the names the other day. You go to different committees, and that's where we really need to hold the conference accountable to have that voice, because all these critical decisions are being made. And so I will say with the Methodist Church, that's a problem, in our denomination. The fact that what John said, 94% or 92, 95% is white. How can that be? Look, we're in the 21st century. This is 2017. And so the whole country is going more racially, ethnic diverse, and the Methodist Church is going in the opposite direction. So what that points to us is, again, this is not just a criticism, but we have to understand our reality. What are we working with here? Those trends reflect also where we are, and if you're saying we have 15% in the conference, but yet we have 57% in the demographics of the geographic boundaries, we've got some work to do. Right. So I will say that, just ending that, my statement, this whole challenge of institutional racism, it's a reality. We have to understand it, how it works, before we can solve it. And we've got to have honest, authentic conversations and be able to put that on the table and say, okay, how is this manifesting itself in all the different ways, the structures of the church? I am type person of going to professionals meeting, and it's 95% white, and it's in a county that's 35-40% racial ethnic. There's a disconnect. But we've got to ask that question, what's wrong with this picture? And if we don't ask that question, it's going to continue. So that's what's before us, and I think that many people, feel that we need to make that change, and not just Hispanics, but across the board. But we've got to create ways to do that, conversations and systems that reflect what where we are. And right now, the system is not where the reality is of our country, of our community, and our demographics.
Yeah, I wanted to, this is a great conversation. I really appreciate your comments. In this question of inclusiveness, it also raises the question of multiculturalism, and if the United Methodist Church is 94% white and 6% people of color, another problem is that we're almost all in separate churches. We have a Korean church, we have a Hispanic church, an African American church, a white church, and so we're not reflecting the kingdom of God. There was a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary named Donald McGavern who came up with a principle, actually borrowed it from the field of sociology. It was called the homogeneous unit principle. And he had been a missionary in India, which has these very strict, the caste system. So he found out as a missionary that he couldn't go into a community, into a caste, and evangelize and start a church. They just didn't respect him. He didn't have the language skills, the cultural skills. And so he found out that you had to find somebody who was from that culture, from that caste, who would then be the person to go in, and because that person would know the culture and know the language. And so the idea of homogeneous unit principle is that people are going to be more attracted to somebody who is within their own group, who knows their own culture, right? You translate that concept into the U.S., and it could lead to segregation. Here in the United Methodist Church, and when it became the Methodist Church in 1939, we created a whole central jurisdiction for African Americans. And so there was segregation built into our structure. And then in 1968, when we became the United Methodist Church, the central jurisdiction was dissolved and African Americans were integrated, right? And the Rio Grande Conference stayed separate. So when is the right time to have churches that are separated ethnically And when is the right time to be the whole church of Jesus Christ? And so in the United States, 85% of all churches, 85% of all churches are 90% of one ethnic group. And so how are we witnessing to society, especially in the era of Trump, where Trump is separating us by races? How is the church witnessing to that society that's fragmented? And millennials are so used to being around people who are different from themselves. 1 in 2 millennials is a person of color. And people are intermarrying. The Hispanics is the group that's most likely to intermarry with a person of a different ethnicity. 1 in 4 Hispanics. So if you have 4 kids, you're going to have un yerno, una nuera, that's going to be of a different ethnicity. Or if you have 8 kids, you're going to have 2. And then just think of the grandkids, right? And why can't there be a church where the whole family is welcome and feels included? At some point, we're going to need bilingual churches where you can invite your yerno and nuera, your grandkids, so that we can all understand the message together. Right? So that's just a question I have.
I have to add a little bit to that from our experience here at La Trinidad. I want to, of the former membership of this church, we have contributed half of our congregation to the integration of suburban rich white churches. Okay,
Yes.
we had a funeral here recently where 80 people came, and half of them, all of them have roots here. Half of them were from 2 rich white suburban churches where the clergy leadership is not chosen on the basis of its cross-cultural skill. Okay, our community has a particular ethnocentrism to it that's not segregationist or racist. It's just a celebration of our identity and our culture. I love what the brother said about affirmative action, because we make sure all of our events that we have, the Noche Mexicana, et cetera, are publicized throughout the whole conference. And all of our Anglo colleagues are invited, all the churches are invited, and generally we get 4 people out of 200 show up, okay? So a lot of these things aren't the churches doing. It's just the way that the magnetism and the social things work. Homogeneous, or not necessarily homogeneous in terms of race, but maybe of social class. Absolutely. And what neighborhood I want to live in, and what part of town I want to go to worship. No, please. I want to hear from you, please.
Well, I had a couple of things just kind of going on throughout it, but talking about, speaking to inclusiveness, the social classes, it's a big deal for me. Having been raised in this area and lived in this area, in this community, in this area, graduated from Burbank High School, it is a big deal to me to start out new. So, sorry, I've only been a Methodist for about 6 years. So this is all different for me. It's completely different and new, but really awesome. The economic classes are definitely, they're divided. It's not equal, by far and wide. I have, as a parent myself, I've tried to have my children be included in many different activities all over San Antonio different churches. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal to go to meetings at conference level, district level, as your children as well, and not be represented in the right way. Very welcomed, but not represented here. And I think that it's important for us to think about our youth, especially to get them equipped to be able to withstand the kind of stigma that they're going to be experiencing, right? Even in the church. But as well for them to be resilient and equipped, was the word that I used, in order to push through, to persevere, and to be able to provide to the community. So my question to you all would be, do you know how our youth, I would say, not just by color, not just by race, but economic status, are being represented in the United Methodist Church in this area? Do you know how that is being done, or is it being done? And if it is, how do I find out?
It's a good question for the panel. I think it speaks to our topic.
Well,
We'll see at the national level, there's a program called HYLA, Hispanic Youth Leadership Academy, and they've been at work for many years, and they train young adults and high school kids about the church, about leadership. Much of that work takes place outside of Texas, up in the Northeast, et cetera, but I think it's a model. The course was being taught at Perkins for many years. But, I think that, there needs to be a special emphasis on that. I'm not aware personally how we're doing that. I was thinking this morning about some of this program that we're training on this Shalom project to specifically target young adults, young people, to train them in these methods so that they can then provide leadership for the church, as we move forward. So we've got more work to do in that area, definitely.
All right.
At the district level, we have the youth retreat camp from the El Valle district, but it's open to the whole conference. Pastor Padilla, he used to be the youth conference coordinator before, but now El Valle is in charge of camp, and it's open to even though it was being run by the former Rio Grande Conference. Now it belongs to the El Valle district, and everyone is welcome. It doesn't matter who you. And yes, it is expensive. That's one of the.
It's very expensive.
That's what we're talking, as a parent, that's something that I'm concerned with. I'm working in these areas, with the youth, for a short period of time, and we have to be able to provide our youth with something that's organized, that's sufficient, and as you mentioned before, that reaches that culture. So we have the mission field out the door. Out the door. We have families that are suffering with drug addiction, poverty, obviously immigration, right? All of these things. What are we doing and what are we talking about at the conference level that's going to help it meet the need?
I would just say, kind of both as a former district superintendent and now on, kind of knowing the people on the conference staff, that the best way for these to happen and the most effective way for these to happen are from the ground up. And so ideally what happens is we find the people who have a passion about this, and we find the folks like as a DS. I told my pastors, I said, you know what? I want you to bring me 25 kids who can't get past the checkpoint to go to camp. Yeah. You bring me those kids and we will have a camp. And we can have a camp here anyway, even without that, but it's just like, help us know where to start pulling. We're not going to have, like at the conference level, a conversation or something and then hope people come because it doesn't work. So instead, what we need to do is link your district superintendent and Tanya Kempen, who does intergenerational discipleship at the conference level. She'd be all over this, but we have to connect it. And so I'm just going to say, I don't mind being the connector, able to be the connector. We'd be glad to do that, to say, where are some kids who are potential leaders whom we can come alongside and start lifting up. Now, some of that will happen at the district level, but if the conference can come alongside that and make that happen, man, we will be all over that. But this is the nature of this structure. It's so hard, so we want to come alongside that, as we put it, kind of hot spots, or the place where passion is, or the place where somebody wants to get something done, and we will, right? I think that's right. We'll find what we need to bring.
Philosophically, I think the point to make here, and I want to call on Brother Gomez here too, is the difference between specialization and segregation.
Absolutely.
Segregation is done to people to deprive them of privilege. Specialization is done by people and that type of ethnocentrism or class sensitivity or whatever is done actually to empower people. And so we oftentimes get things confused. If you listen to the narrative from the people historically from the Rio Grande Conference, they understood their conference as specialist. If you read Floyd Curl's book on the history of Southwest Texas Methodism, published in the 1950s, he understood the Rio Grande Conference as segregationist. And it was saying that someday we needed to overcome this inequity and this separation and unite everybody. As if the dream of an open itineracy was going to happen, and all of a sudden, all of these things. we've experienced it here at LT, and there is movement happening, but it's just away. They're not coming here. It's the other way. Brother Gomez.
I want to make 2 points. The first point I want to make, and kind of touched on it, focus more on it, is we've done about diversity and inclusivity. The folks out there, the world out there is much more diverse. From about 1849, this was arbitrarily to about 1980 in this area. When we thought about reaching out to people with Hispanics, it was basically people Hispanics, some, and Mexican American. From 1980 on, it's exploded. I talked to the people who cut grass and pick up the trash, whatever. They're from all the poor. They're from El Salvador, Guatemala, they're from Honduras. Who's reaching out to them? Sometimes these folks are Methodists. That's the first point. The second one is that of all places, I find hope that an institution can actually do this. When I went to Southwestern and transferred in 1967, there were 7 Hispanic guys and 1 Hispanic girl. 8. This year, the entering class, 330, 340, more than 1/3 are Hispanics. And what's the total Hispanic population? Laura? 6, 7,
Oh, at the school?
Southwestern.
See, something
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like that.
Maybe a little lower than that, but yeah.
Well, let's say 400.
Yeah.
At least 400. Now, how did that happen? The school has been intentional. Not overly intentional, but intentional. And Southwest was a hard school to get into. Now, in that old school with its old structures, and it's a very white school, and do that, our churches, if they get more intentional and let the love of Christ really mold them and move them and work in them, we can do it too.
Just a little bit of data on inclusiveness, and then we're going to move on to our next couple of topics. We've touched a little bit on communications and witness, and we want to talk just visit one more philosophical thing about funding. As it is right now, according to the conference journal, clergy members that are non-white clergy members, persons of color, are twice as likely to be serving in an extension ministry appointment as their Anglo colleagues among their in the conference. I personally know folks that have opted for that, not because of a calling to that particular thing, but just because of limited employment opportunities. We can talk a lot about our need for inclusiveness. That philosophy has got to be, and a value system has to be all the way to the top, because ultimately with clergy, where you're sent and whether you're sent is a decision of a committee. And so that's, and there's a positive side of that too, because our extension ministers, our campus ministers, our leaders in that are really outside the walls of the church and directly engaged with the mission field. So there's 2 sides, positive and negative side, but that's just something that's part of our inclusiveness. And I think it behooves us to look at patterns of inclusiveness at all levels: the conference staffing, the committees, of course, the districts, et cetera. Want to move on. Been a very great conversation. Talking about witness, our public witness. There's been frustration with the website, the Unidos. I've had conversation back and forth with Will about this on different things. There's a top-down aspect to that witness, but there's also a bottom-up. And you're part of the group, the Pastors Alliance, right, Isidro, down the valley? Could you speak a little bit about what that group does and how it's effective at connecting Latino pastors and churches and also allies of Hispanic ministry and helping improve that communication?
Yes, the pastors from the El Valle District Hispanic ministers. Actually, it's not just Hispanics. It's open to any ministers that want to join us. And one of the things that we do is, of course, we get together once a month, and we plan our Cultos Unidos joint services. Those are once a month, and they're mainly conducted in Spanish, just to keep our traditions, keep everything going. And yes, we get together and we talk about our struggles, our problems, and our joys, concerns, and it's just to help each other. It seems like the number is decreasing. We're getting smaller and smaller because a lot of our pastors, many of them are part-time ministers, which means they have secular jobs, which means they cannot attend the meetings, which means they stay outside the circle. So yes, the alliance is getting smaller, and we're losing strength, power. And that's really a concern because when it comes to the diverse conference, we don't really have the representation. And if, like I said, if we don't have a diverse group, there's no way that we're going to be able to identify ourselves or the community with us. And we try to do different stuff as the Alliance, La Alianza de Pastores del Valle. We try to do mission work in the community. We try to reach out to those in need because, like I said, some of us, but we can identify with the community. And that's what we try to do in El Valle.
Thank you. We have the president of our local association, la presidenta de la Asociación de Pastores aquí, Liliana. Would you step up for a second and tell us a little bit about the Alianza here? We have some churches here whose pastors are not part of the group who could benefit, que pueden recibir beneficio. There you go.
Oh,
Hey,
there
she's
you go.
ready.
Mírala.
She wasn't prepared.
Sorry, but I'm prepared. No, nuestra alianza tiene trabajando juntos. We work together for 4 or 5 months, and we prepare the special service for the churches, Hispanic. You can share to the churches. We prepare this special service in November 5 in Coker, and we meet every month in different places. We change days and times because some pastor is available one day, everyone is not. And the most important for us is encourage to work together. Don't feel alone. Working hard with our congregation to be encouraged to outreach the community. The other thing is how we can learn together. ¿Qué cosas están pasando en tu iglesia que nos sirven a nosotros? How can learn? And the other thing is areas for education, like how Methodist, how ministry can help us, how DCM, they can help us, or how the other offices can help to the different kinds of ministries in their churches. We work together with Vacation Bible Schools. We prepared 7 Vacation Bible Schools around to the city, and we received some monies to help to the churches. Some churches don't have a Vacation Bible School, but they choose one day Vacation Bible School, Saturday, and the money served to the music, the snacks, and everything. But the most important for us is encourage the churches. Don't feel alone. Don't feel que no hay recursos. Because when we meet together, we can share the resources. And I think so. And please go to the service.
Something to point out about that Culto Unido, this is the first such Culto Unido hosted at the historic Coker United Methodist Church. And that is because the pastor there, David Blanco, who is the associate minister there, former Rio Grande Conference pastor, is appointed to Coker, much like I'm appointed here. It was a cross-conference kind of thing made possible by unification. So, what we haven't done much, and we're running out of, we've got a couple of minutes left, is point out that, and I think our panelists would agree, there are lights of hope and success and fruitfulness in this area of ministry.
Can I just
Please.
read my list that I
Please.
made as I
Yes.
was sitting here thinking?
I'm glad you have a list. That's
Yeah,
good.
I do have a list.
Share it.
I mean,
'Cause we
one
want to
is sit-
celebrate what God's doing too.
One is sitting right here, and you and Stan, Windsong Church here in San Antonio is just an amazing success story, and I need to get out and worship with y'all. Karen Haran, of course, the new congregational development person, just came back with huge eyes with stars in them after having talked to you. She's thrilled to death about the potential there. And I'd love to hear an update from you, but that's the church my father was appointed to when I was born, Rector Memorial, that flipped.
Named for A.E. Rector,
Right.
who founded Coker United Methodist Church.
Right, and who also spoke English, German, and Spanish because he thought you needed to be able to bring the gospel to whoever you met in the Texas region.
And spent his retirement years teaching Spanish Bible study here.
Anyway, there you go. So, beautiful story, but I do need personally to catch up, but it sounds like y'all are doing great work. Casa Hermosa is up in the kind of New Braunfels region, and that's transferred kind of over to Seguin, and I mean there's some conversation about how that's getting managed, but that project continues with Javier Leyva. Dripping Springs United Methodist Church, kind of their own accord, started a Spanish-speaking service, and they've got some 60 people showing up every week. And that's just that local congregation deciding to do that. At Coker, Rio Texas Conference, where David Blanco, they recently decided to go from Saturday night to Sunday morning, and I preached last Sunday mostly to the band, because I don't know if they knew the preacher was out of town, so nobody showed up. But they're trying to position that service so that it'll reach more people. But Coker and the leadership there are very committed to that. In San Angelo, there's the attempt of a new church start, Bethel, I think, ¿cómo se llama? And Bethel, I think that's right. And so that's needing some tweaking. So we've got new eyes on that, and we've spent some money, but we need to redirect and set some benchmarks for that. And then finally, Valley Praise Santa Rosa, where Santa Rosa was a church. I got to the Valley in 2010, and they'd been talking about closing for 10 years before that. And those people hung on, and they hung on, and they hung on, and finally they celebrated 100 years, and then finally, I think it finally became clear this just needs to be done, all right? 9 little Anglo, very, very old people. Super sweet, lovely women, one woman who had helped start the Colonia out in Los Naranjos, that Colonia ministry. Lots of good people there, but they just couldn't do it anymore. Building right across the street from the high school. And so Valley Praise in Harlingen, 10 miles away. Valley Praise is ready to try to launch and do some new things and multiply. So Aaron Science brings on James Ramirez, Abraham Ramirez's nephew, and that place is happening. And Valley Praise has taken it, and conference funds have gone in there, and he's got anywhere from 70 to 100 in worship on Sundays. And it's linked to it, anyway, it's a great success story too. So there are places where these things are happening. We need more of these places. And, when you have a person, or you have a place, or you have an idea, or God lays something on you, holler our direction.
That's very good. And we're just at the hour, and I want to see if there's anybody else from the community that has a question or a comment for the panel before we wrap up. I do want to mention one last thing. We mentioned earlier we were going to talk about finances and money. We did hear earlier about grants that are channeled through the districts, grants that are available through the annual conference. It is important to note that in the unification, this Episcopal area surrendered $800,000 per quadrennium in general church support that was coming into the Rio Grande Conference. It wasn't all getting used, but it was coming in. And
It wasn't going to continue.
it wasn't going to continue. They, the conference, the unification documents do say, the FACTA report says that one of the purposes is to unite the wealth of this former Southwest Texas with the missional expertise of the Rio Grande Conference. That language is in the unification documents. It's important for us to get familiar with that document because that's not the only philosophy that's out there. I have a quote from a very well-known bishop in our jurisdiction, not ours, where he says no church should pay for the pastoral support of another church, and all those subsidies should cease, and get rid of equitable compensation, and all of this. This is his, his ideology about that. Whereas we've known in the Latino community that those types of shared resources help offset the disadvantages that our servants face working in places that have generational poverty. So context is how we started this conversation, talking about our mission field. Context is how we're going to wrap it up. And I want to ask if our panelists have any last closing remarks, and we'll be done. Yes?
I just have an announcement. I mentioned in my introduction that Austin Seminary has an online certificate program in Spanish. There's a total of 7 classes to receive the certificate. And I teach a class in their church planting. This semester, John Herron, who's a Methodist pastor in the Valley, is teaching a class. And so just for leadership training, it's more aimed toward the lay leader, but somebody who may have a calling towards the ministry. So just, it's a resource that's out there. It's all online, so you can take it from wherever you are. And it's 100% in Spanish.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know your name. What's your name again? Iris. I just want to thank you for your comment about the youth, because it just gave me an idea, because it is true, camp is very expensive. And at camp, that's when we do the invitation to those who want to feel the calling to be pastors, to come, and we get a lot of response. But when you went like this, that means it's like God is calling those who can afford to go to camp. So I think like you were saying, we need to do something for those who cannot cross the checkpoint or those who cannot pay to go to camp. So thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Y'all are making notes of this observation. Those unification committees were 2 different committees. One was impaneled for
3.
There were 3.
There were 4, really.
4 altogether.
If you start with the Bishop's Commission on Area Cooperative Ministry, that was the pre.
Uh-huh.
Then you had unification strategy.
There was the steering team and then the
unification
implementation.
Implementation, and then the transitional uniting table. Yeah, but
Not even the same group of people each time. But
the
I'll
need
just
for the
respond.
conversation.
As chair of the Transforming Communities Vision Team, I think this is an area that we definitely want to look at. Right now, we're starting some initiative around Native American ministries. We're sending people to their annual conference and that they have annual training. So I think that this makes sense. You know, based on what Reverend Chavez has said, perhaps there could be another training, a consultation, some gathering, you know, to understand more what's happening, but then also some training, some resources. So I think the conversation definitely needs to start. I want to thank John and y'all for attending this. This is not the end. This is, I think, the beginning. And so that certainly has made an impression on me as chair of that committee. And then that's what I want to take also to the Uniting Table. So, and I will just kind of put a plug in also for, again, our program. It's called the Transforming Communities of Praxis. And so really it's teaching people community development. It's called asset-based community development. It's a new approach. So it's really about leadership development, congregational development, and community development. And so we've had 4 churches this year. They just finished their second training. We've got one more. It provides funding. So I want to encourage y'all as members of churches to look at that program. We trained Pollard. We did a training in Austin, and then I was down at the Eagle Pass that the church from Del Rio also attended. What was really cool about that was also that they brought in Vista volunteers that they're working with, also from Piedras Negras. So people really liked it. It was a day of, you know, learning new things, and so I saw a lot of excitement. So I'm real hopeful for that we can continue more of that kind of training in the local congregations and Hispanic communities. And if you have any questions, you can ask me or Abel. We've got another class of 4 churches that will be training next year, and then 4, and it'll be online. And so take a look at it. I mean, we've got some things in place that can help your congregation.
Very exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Abel
Yes.
says it's online. Can he send a hard copy to the churches so they can make copies?
I will email it to you personally.
And announce it to the public, because we didn't even know these sessions were going on
Yeah.
until, you know, it was mentioned personally, and then Googled it. At first notice of the title of the program, it was just like, it's just a party, fiesta party, or sometime we did not know, we were getting to know, you know, the disconnect that there was between the conference, so.
Yeah.
You gotta be very,
Down.
specific to who you're talking to is what they're gonna read into it.
Yes.
That's another thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other closing remarks from our panel? Anybody out here have a last remark or thought? Greg.
Just have a word of hope. Bishop Martinez loaned me this book, and I brought it to give it back to him, but he's not here.
You get to keep it.
It's about the history of Santiago Taboya, who was, I believe, ordained by Alejandro Sutherland.
Yes, he was the first Mexican. He was ordained by he was ordained by the bishop. Worked side by side with Sutherland as the first Mexican American superintendent.
And I just want to read a little section about, it's about others, and to say how we've come from there. 1881. His encounters with local communities were not always pleasant. In the primarily Catholic communities in which he preached, Protestantism was seen as worse than even the papally condemned Masonry. A community disputed Corpus Christi over the validity of local schools and their openness to Mexican American students proved to be a thinly veiled civil war between community Catholics and community Methodists. And that was 1881. And to think of today, I have a previous church member, a youth, who is the daughter of an African American. She has an African American father and an Anglo mother. And with all of the cultural stuff that's going on today, she made a comment on Facebook that said, "How do I claim who I am?" And she said, "I am not African American. I am not Anglo. I am Christian, and I will always be that." And it reminds me of Paul's letter to the Galatians, where he says, "In Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, but all are one in Christ." To me, that's the vision. And we treat everyone equally. Do we try to? My job is to sniff out money, Iris, and to try and find resources. And if we have a good idea, we're gonna get it funded.
Amen. That's right.
And I do have a voice on the district strategy team, and she's sitting right she has no trouble expressing her voice.
Great.
So we appreciate you. We've just started the district strategy team going again.
Right.
And this is part of our work. It's part of our
Amen.
process. And I really like what Isidro said and what Laura said, what Phil said, and it's the first time I've met you. It's wonderful meeting you. Thank you.
Likewise.
And just a remark in response to Greg's thought. One time I was crossing the border into Mexico. This is an anecdote. Anecdotes are great. We love telling anecdotes in the Latino church. Crossing over, I had the aduana guy the Mexican official was on the other side. And he looked at my stuff, my passport, and he said, ¿Qué eres? What are you? The identity question. And I was shocked and surprised. I just gave him the thing. And I said, I don't know why, but I said, well, I'm Christian. It was the same answer. I'm Christian. And he goes, no. He goes, are you Mexican or are you American?
Right.
And I said, well, I'm American. I was talking to him in Spanish. And he said, then why do you sound like a Mexican? And I said, back to my first answer, because I'm Christian. Because my Christianity is what propelled me to learn Spanish. So back to the origin again. And I think that's a great place for all of us to end up today. And again, my immense gratitude to this expert panel and to our wisdom in the community today. My goal for today in this Congreso was to show the world and show God and show our viewers online that there is wisdom, there is passion, there is expertise, there is experience, there is history, there is identity in this movement, in this obra. The choice of the word obra is intentional because it doesn't have that us-them language of mission, of us to them. Obra is everybody working together, collaboration, working together to build up la obra, right? And this is parlance everywhere. ¿Cómo está la obra? ¿Cómo está la obra? We're all involved in la obra. We're still building. I want to invite right now, I'm going to ask Greg if you could step up and close us out with a prayer and bless he's our district superintendent for Las Misiones district. It is a lollipop-shaped district, equally sweet. And if you would close us out with a word of prayer and a blessing for the food that we're going to share. I don't know how much is down there, hopefully enough, over in the gym. For those of you who want to stay, and please visit with one another. One of the things, too, to note in here is that we have in both Octaviano and Stan, pastors whose Hispanic ministry careers were in the Southwest Texas Conference prior to merger. So we have, and we're part of the Lay Missionary Planters Network training through Path One that was done through the Rio Grande Conference. So just a point of privilege recognizing their presence here too. Go ahead.
Amen.
Before I pray, I think I need to tell you how deeply thankful I am that I believe that this session is in English because of me. So I am humbled by that, and thank you. I can follow Spanish, sort of, but it helps me a lot in English. Let us pray. Lord, we give thanks as we gather together to discuss the obra, the work of our community. Lord, we recognize that we are one in you. And we pray, Lord, that your witness and your message will spread out throughout this community and without this world, that things can change, that people may find you and find their unity in you. We give thanks for the wisdom of our panel. We give thanks for the interest in those who have gathered here together. And Lord, especially we give thanks for the food. Bless us and let us go out to serve you in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Wow, good stuff. Thank you. Glad it was recorded. Would you like to announce making the connection he made with Hyla, that Christian de la Rosa?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Announce the next one.
Because she's
To
still
let
doing
y'all
it
know,
Boston
there's
now,
one
no?
more of these
She's still doing it in
seminarios
Boston.
in the
Yeah.
Congreso.
Yeah.
There's going to be one more on October 14th. They mentioned Hyla, the organizer of that, Reverend Dr. Cristian de la Rosa, is going to be here for our third seminario in 2 weeks on October 14th, doing visioning, doing planning, doing strategizing. Bring your church leadership. Bring your pastor. We're going to meet in the gym, not in here. We're going to be around round tables so groups can work by local church. Se van a trabajar en iglesias locales. Traen sus concilios, traen sus líderes, traen sus laicos y sus pastores, porque está la hermana Cristian de la Rosa para darnos visión. And she's preaching here the following Sunday. I know y'all have your own churches to go to. God bless you, but we're going to have her here in the pulpit.
All right, good. Hola, yo iba a decir.